Hey folks, I'm Chuck Black. We're doing 52 weeks of Python in 10-minute sessions. Today's topic is data normalization. Specifically, we're going to talk about how do you do things like comparisons of strings when there are a mix of capitals and non-capitals, and how do you compare things like MAC addresses when they look like this. So that's what we'll be talking about. Let's get started. So what am I talking about when I say normalize data? Well, for this lesson, what I'm talking about is as follows. There's a number of cases. One would be string normalization. Do you see how the name for this device is all in lowercase, but the name over here is a mix of lower and uppercase? You and I as humans can figure out that that's probably the same device. The same with the vendor name is capitalized down here, but not up there. We can figure that out, but computers are very precise, and so those will be different. So how do you deal with that? So I'll have some code that deals with that. Another situation where normalization is required would be MAC addresses. You may be familiar with this format. This is an uppercase version of the same. This is how Cisco sometimes represents it. This is how some vendors use dashes instead of colons. This is just a wacky one that has all different types. A lot of times in software, you're going to need to do some type of normalization to see if things are actually the same, even though the computer comparison may fail. And that's what we're going to look at in this particular lesson. Now, the last part of this has IP address normalization, which I just threw in here, I think mainly to introduce you to the IP address package that's available. I don't think we'll be able to get to this in the 10-minute version, but you can certainly look at this in the long form and find out more about it if you so choose. So how do you deal with string situations where you want to ignore the case, like in this situation, comparing name, vendor, model, and OS for different devices? Well, as you can see, I have my if statement right here, and the way that I deal with it is the way that it tends to be done is you just lowercase everything. So the both items, device 1 and device 2, I'm going to do a lowercase function, and this will cause device name to be all lowercase, which in the device 1, it won't have to do anything, but with device 2, it will make that all lowercase. So when we do this comparison, this will turn out to be equal, and the same is true for doing this for vendor, model, and OS. Now, other languages have case-insensitive comparisons. Python does not. So this is how we need to do it, using the lower function. So one thing I want to point out is lower probably will work in all or almost all of your situations, but there are certain languages that have multi-byte characters and other more advanced, nuanced languages, and since the world is flat, we need to be aware of that. Casefold for comparison takes care of that, so you don't have to worry about multi-byte characters if you're using something like Greek or some of the Asian languages, etc. So casefold may be a better choice when attempting to lowercase normalize the strings that you are comparing. So let's look at normalizing MAC addresses. Now I've made all of these different MAC addresses, and I encourage you to follow and understand everything that I do here, because it's not so much dealing with MAC addresses as understanding Python. If you are formerly a beginner and moving through the stages of learning Python, then this will have some good stuff in here for you. So here's all my different types of MAC addresses. I want to compare them to make sure that they're equal, and you can see, just to give you a taste, here's my comparison of all of those things. I'll get to them in a minute. The first thing that I do is I define a function, and this function is going to be passed in an attribute, which is the MAC address. And look at this thing. All it does is it returns the MAC address after I have manipulated it. So I'm going to return a value which is going to be the MAC address. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make it all lowercase. So that's what that does. Now what you see here is this dot something, dot something, dot something. What we call this in programming languages is method or function chaining, where I chain them one after the other. Answer me this question and think about it. What is the result of mac.lower? What is the return value when I call mac.lower? Hopefully you understand this, but the result is a string, which is the lowercase version of this MAC address. So now I have a string, which is the lowercase version of the MAC address. So when I say dot replace to that string, it's going to take the string that is the result of this, and now it's going to do a dot replace on it. So what it's going to do is it's going to take that lowercase string, and what is replace? Remember from our strings functions, replace, it's going to take the thing that it matches here, and it's going to replace it with that thing there. Well, what am I replacing it with? You can see there's nothing there, so I'm basically taking out the colons. Now I'm doing my function chaining again. The result of this replace is going to be a string, so now my string has been lowercased, the colons have been replaced with nothing. Now I'm going to do another replace where I'm replacing a dot with nothing, and then my last function chain that I'm doing right here, I'm replacing a dash with nothing. So all this normalize thing does is it takes the MAC address, makes it lowercase, removes the colons, removes the dots, and removes the dashes. Make sure you understand what I'm doing here and you're not just waving your hands and saying it's magic. So that's what happens when I call normalize. Now here's my if statement. Look at this if statement. I've put parentheses around it because it makes it easier for me when I do multi-line statements. If I hadn't done those parentheses, I could have done the same thing, but I would have had to have a backslash, which is what you use in Python to indicate the line is continuing to the next line. You can see PyCharm is smart enough to warn me about this. It's unnecessary. I don't need to do that because I have these parentheses. So I'm going to say normalize, and here I'm doing a comparison. I'm comparing one thing to the next thing, which is getting compared to the next thing, which is getting compared to the next thing, etc., etc. So it's comparing everything against this normalized version, which, as you can mentally assume, is what's going to come back when I have performed this function and called normalize. So I'm calling normalize, passing in colons, then I pass in caps, dots, hyphens, wacky, etc., and I print that out. So, number of things that we did here. Remember, we're unpacking. One is that I have a function that I've defined called normalize, which I am then going to call. It has a parameter, which is the MAC address. I'm going to repetitively call it over and over again, so that's why I put it into a function. My function is going to return a value, which is the result of these function chained, all of these functions that I've chained together. Lower, replace of colon, replace of dot, replace of dash. And so it's going to do that, do all of them for all of these. Now, when it calls MacAddr colons, it's going to lowercase it. That's good. It's going to remove the colons. That's good. It's not actually going to have to do anything for these two because they aren't there. Not a problem when you do a replace. It replaces it if there's anything there, and if there's not, then it leaves it the same as what it was. That is normalizing of MAC addresses. Okay, really quickly, can you tell me what we talked about? We're talking about data normalization. We started with strings, and we normalized our string data by using the lower function first of all. Then we looked a little bit deeper and saw, oh, well, you can use caseful. That works for other languages that have multi-byte characters and things of that nature. Then we looked at MAC address normalization, all of these different formats which different vendors use. Here's the normalized version. That's what I want to do for comparison. Here's the function that does normalization, and here is how we call it. And if you're interested in IP address stuff, look at the long form version. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, let me know. Thanks for listening.